Hi, hello. I'm Plush. I'm Plush Ebola. I'm the gamer. I play video games, and now I review them as well. This is my review for Star Wars Outlaws. Thanks to the Ubisoft partner program, I have received a review copy of Star Wars Outlaws, the newest game from Ubisoft and Massive Entertainment set in the Star Wars universe. This comes less than a year after Ubisoft released a game for another big budget Disney IP, with Avatar Frontiers of Pandora dropping in December 2023. Developed in part by Massive Entertainment, who also worked on Outlaws. This presents an interesting new trend for Ubisoft, a publisher known for some of the biggest, most widely recognizable open world games on the market. From Assassin's Creed to Far Cry, Ubisoft has secured their own little corner in the gaming landscape, pumping out new releases for their franchises on a near yearly basis. We know exactly what to expect from an Ubisoft open world. So much that we have a term for open world games that share Ubisoft's format of open world design: the Ubisoft Formula. A systematic checklist of relatively simple and relatively satisfying combat and platforming challenges that slowly reveal a map cluttered with objective markers. Then it's up to you to go about ritualistically clearing and decluttering said objectives and map. Still, with a massive budget, some seriously impressive graphics, and the power of brand recognition, did games like Avatar and Star Wars ever stand a chance to push Ubisoft beyond their tried and true formula? Or, more so than ever, were these games doomed to be the most generic of the bunch? I will try not to spend too much time comparing Outlaws to Frontiers of Pandora, just as much as I'll try not to compare it to the EA Jedi games. But when there's an elephant this big in the room, it's hard to feign ignorance. More importantly, do I actually recommend this game at launch? Is this more of a wait for a good sale type of game? Would I even recommend this game at all? Well, let's dig in and find out. Star Wars Outlaws is an open-world stealth adventure game that tells an original story featuring mostly original characters set in the time period between The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. The focus is squarely on the criminal underworld aspect of the universe. So much so that I don't even think the word Jedi comes up once in the entire playtime of the game. It's an interesting, if somewhat baffling, angle. Maybe it's just me, but when I think of the ultimate Star Wars fantasy, I'm not picturing myself as an underworld thief fighting for literal scrap metal to get by. I want to be a cool telekinetic space wizard that has a laser sword. Or I want to participate in the biggest battles spanning across all of Star Wars history. I even see the appeal in a game solely dedicated to piloting, or a Star Wars boomer shooter, given how well the iconic blaster sounds and the labyrinthine facility designs, they lend themselves perfectly to the genre. But that's just me. I'm sure thousands have looked at Han Solo and said, yeah, I want to be that guy. But that's the thing. Han Solo is the ultimate outlaw of the Star Wars universe. Our plucky protagonist, Kay Vess, is charming and likable, mostly thanks to an excellent and surprisingly heartfelt performance from voice actor Humberly Gonzalez. But really, is she that much different a character from Han Solo? I wondered, at least by the end of the game, what Kay would add to the overall narrative of Star Wars. Not that one really exists anymore. Really, though, is she anything more than a likable protagonist? A character just memorable enough to add to the names and the hat they pull from to make future cameos in shows and cartoons? Could this story have worked with Han as the main character, even if they had to, shift the timeline around? Absolutely. And I think the game would probably be more appealing to a wider audience if Han was the main character. I don't mind Kay. In fact, I mostly like her, even if she is a little generic. I would just think, the game is literally called Star Wars Outlaws, and Han Solo is probably the most iconic sci-fi scoundrel in all of pop culture. Yet it's set during a time period where he's literally frozen in carbonite. It's just a really odd choice. Let's look at this from another angle. Massive Entertainment's claim to fame within Ubisoft was their work on Division 1 and 2, the closest Ubisoft ever got to a live service success story. And while those games don't appeal to me in particular, I think at least part of the appeal, besides, simply having something you can play for infinity ad nauseum, is maybe having a self-insert character. Like, sure, the Division's character creator is extremely basic, but a little bit of customizability goes a long way, even if it's artificial. I would be more likely to play a game that I'm not particularly interested in if there's a character creator involved. Apply that to Star Wars, sell me on the idea of making my own Outlaw, and even if the gameplay ended up being nearly identical to what we got here, I'm still more interested. In games like the Mass Effect trilogy, we're all playing the same exact character with Commander Shepard, yet that thinly customizable veil of creating what your Shepard looks like, I think it adds a personal touch that's hard not to find a little appealing. This is all to say that I just find the decision to make a game focused on this particular slice of the Star Wars universe with original, set-in-stone characters just an odd one, from a marketing standpoint. Surely they must have a story worth telling, with a wide cast of lovable scoundrels who have arcs worth experiencing, right? Like, surely Ubisoft must have some very intriguing mechanics worth experimenting with to make Kay truly stand out and feel unique against an ever-growing sea of Star Wars blandness. Upon booting up the game for the first time, my interest was basically non-existent. I'd seen absolutely zero gameplay leading up to this moment, even ignoring a 4-hour gameplay reel Ubisoft sent to use a few weeks ago as part of a preview coverage event. My experience with Star Wars Outlaws is a totally fresh one, served on a blank slate, with only the Ubisoft formula to inform me on what to expect. My assumption was Star Wars Grand Theft Auto, or Star Wars Splinter Cell, the Splinter Cell game we've been waiting for all this time, now with Star Wars gadgets and gizmos. I expected varied, emergent gameplay with improvisational stealth segments, but unfortunately, even just expecting the typical Ubisoft formula, just the most bare bones of what to expect out of them, it was setting my expectations too high. But before we get into all that, let's start with some positives. Star Wars Outlaws is genuinely, from the bottom of my heart, one of the most visually impressive games I've ever seen. Ubisoft has never necessarily slacked in the graphics department, but I certainly wouldn't say they're known for having the best looking games. This has drastically changed with the newest iteration of their Snowdrop engine, with Avatar Frontiers of Pandora seriously turning some heads and dropping some jaws with its visual fidelity and the density of detail within its vast jungle environment. Massive has carried over their Snowdrop know-how to Outlaws, and while I think overall Frontiers of Pandora impresses just a little more, okay, a lot more, actually. Frontiers of Pandora is kind of just a better game on all fronts, like visually and mechanically. Like, sure, you could just say it's Far Cry meets Avatar, Avatar Cry, if you will, but the Ubisoft formula is implemented more naturally. Locomotion through the world is immediately satisfying, combat is explosive and varied, and the sense of environmental scale is enormous, and Wait. I said I wouldn't go on these tangents. I said we can't talk about Avatar. This is a Star Wars review. So, okay. All right. Sorry about that. Even so, Outlaws stands up there with some of the best looking games I've ever seen. Like Avatar Frontiers of Pandora, Cyberpunk, Hellblade 2, Wukong. This is a top tier visual feast. Ray Trace Global Illumination is used to dazzling effect in all modes in Outlaws, simulating the realistic way light bounces around an environment in convincingly lighting rooms in just a shockingly realistic fashion. This is most beautifully realized in the city areas of the game, which are rendered in incredible, amazing detail and are easily my favorite sections of the game. Mulling about in the back alleys, talking to shady black market dealers, betting on digital horse races, getting hints on the next big score from the nearest trusty bartender. It's all extremely atmospheric and immersive. Early on in my experience, I messaged a friend, telling him this game feels like it was made with more care than the usual Ubisoft formula game. It makes one of the strongest first impressions I've maybe had with a game in recent memory, aside from Wukong Black Myth. Because, while Wukong is a lot more bombastic and over the top with its visuals, Outlaws is subtle with it, letting it wash over you rather than explode in your face. If only the game held up to that standard outside the cities. And not that the visuals ever really drop in quality. Ray trace reflections give Imperial bases and stormtroopers a beautiful gloss over all of their their hard surfaces, their armor, and the metal floors of the facilities, metal walls. Ray trace shadows naturally light the underbelly of, distant rock formations on the horizon, just making everything look really natural. It's gorgeous. It's also the first time, maybe ever, that I actually left the film grain option on in the settings. The developers have said their goal was to capture specifically the look of the original film trilogy, with the film grain and chromatic aberration dialed in to simulate the cinematography of those original movies in particular. I made the conscious decision to stay true, as true to the revision as possible, because, the game is that gorgeous. I did, however, turn off the cinematic presentation option, which adds big old black bars to the top and bottom of the screen. It further emulates that filmic look, but what it doesn't do is actually give you a wider view of your surroundings. Instead, the black bars are simply blocking off the top and bottom of the screen. I chose more visibility over the illusion of cinema here. I can only go so far. It is, after all, a game, not a movie. I don't need or want a video game to look like a movie, but as long as the visual language of it is clear, readable, and smooth, I'm willing to give in to the developer's, intended vision. Outlaws has a strong, nearly flawless presentation. So, you know what? Film grain stays on. I'll be honest, I don't even know if I noticed it. I don't even know if I noticed it throughout my entire playthrough. But sure, Massive, you guys get the W there. I also love the performance options available at launch, which on PS5 include a 30 FPS quality mode, a 40 FPS quality mode, and a 60 FPS performance mode. I played the entirety of the game at the 40 FPS option, as I did with Avatar before it, and I hope Ubisoft continues this standard with their games moving forward. Looking at you, Assassin's Creed Shadows, let me play you in 40 frames per second. Just as a little side note, too, all capture footage in this review is using the game's performance mode, and it's captured at 1080p, so don't expect the full visual feast from this review, but trust me, it's a good-looking game. Look, I'm not someone who instantly writes off a game for being capped at 30 frames per second. 30 frames per second isn't even, unplayable for me. But if there is a 60 FPS mode, I usually jump straight to that and never look back. Quality be damned. I firmly believe that all developers should at least strive to give console gamers an option to flick between modes. I guess it's not possible with every game, but lately, That's been less and less the case, as we've been seeing a promising amount of performance options in games from studios from all across the board. Though, with varying degrees of stability, but it's the option and the effort that matters. For me, a slight edge from 30 frames per second to 40 FPS is just smooth enough for my eyes to be happy. Plus, I want to admire the pretty graphics, you know? I want to see the fancy ray tracing. I have a 4K 120 hertz display that is capable of VRR. I have it all. The console's capable. So, I appreciate the inclusion in the options. I genuinely think the 40 frame per second quality mode seriously improved my overall enjoyment of the game. Because outside of the impressive visual fidelity, this game doesn't really have much else to offer. It sounds cynical, but this is probably the shallowest, most cookie cutter, by the books, the safest bet game Ubisoft has ever made. Yet, I don't hate it. I don't even fully dislike it. I don't think it has any real reason to exist outside a chance for Ubisoft to look good to Disney and make lots and lots of money and probably make more cookie cutter games that are even more of blatant cash grabs than this one. That's the cynic in me. Massive has done such an excellent job with the presentation and the atmosphere. They really do build a foundation strong enough for me to say this game actually might be worth it for you. It all depends what you want to get out of it. Because as pretty as it is, the majority of your time isn't going to be spent in those moody cities, villages, and slums, soaking up those neon ray-traced rays. And even if you did hang around for long enough, the only thing you'd discover is that there isn't really much to do in those areas aside from vibe. The majority of your time will either be spent sneaking, bonking, and heisting through about 20-ish hours of story, or sneaking, bonking, and heisting around in its 20-ish hours of boring copy-paste open-world side content. With only a few real gameplay divergences to distract with, I sure hope you like sneaking through vents, lockpicking crates, and playing Wordle. I want to focus on the story first, particularly the performances. This section of the review will not feature any story spoilers whatsoever, but I will be talking about a few of the main characters, the setup, some locations, and the main thread you'll be following throughout the course of your journey. To put it simply, it's Star Wars Ocean's 11. It's like Diet Ocean's 11, but also it's Solo, minus Han Solo. Honestly, it serves its purpose. It makes for some surprisingly fun storytelling within the Star Wars universe. And what more do you really expect out of a modern Star Wars story? If it was anything more, sorry to disappoint, at least the dialogue is delivered convincingly. Hell, I'd even go a step further in saying the actors are bringing a depth to these characters that the writers seemingly refuse to expand on. For example, a great dynamic between main baddie man Sliro and one of your crew members is absolutely wasted, being introduced so late in the game. It presents just enough intrigue and depth between these two characters for me to feel myself physically deflate when that thread was abandoned immediately after being introduced. But let's start at the beginning, okay? You play as Kay Vess, who's played by Humberly Gonzalez, and are accompanied by her obligatory cute sidekick that also functions as a gameplay mechanic, Nyx. Kay botches a job, gets marked for death by the aforementioned wonderfully hammy, scene-chewing crime lord Sliro, played by, and I'm probably gonna butcher this name, Cowlin Byrne? I think that's the actor's name. And then she has to assemble a crew of, the best outlaws in the galaxy to pull off a big ol' heist, steal Sliro's fortunes, and get that pesky death mark off her head. It's a great setup for shenanigans, and a story bursting with quirky characters. It pretty much peters out after the setup, though. You'll jump around between a savanna, an icy city, a dense rainforest, and Tatooine, because is it really a piece of Star Wars media without Tatooine? They're fine environments, gorgeous to look at, sure, but most of the important story beats take place within interiors, like starships or caves or other places that have metallic hallways connected by vents. Ubisoft has never really been known for big action scripted set pieces either. I can't think of a single one in Avatar Frontiers of Pandora except for maybe the final mission, which was a nightmare, by the way. And here I go on an Avatar tangent again. Don't you hate when a game focuses on improvisational, stealthy gameplay for the entirety of its runtime, only for the last minute, the last mission to become a 1 versus 100 horde mode shooting gallery? It's look, at least Star Wars Outlaws doesn't wait until the very final mission to suddenly say, I'm doomed now. Star Wars Outlaws does it nearly at the end of every mission. Let's put a pin in this and wrap back around to it once we get to the gameplay, okay? Alright. Star Wars Outlaws has 3 set pieces, maybe? And they're okay. If you want big action and big set pieces in your Star Wars games, well, head on over to EA. Their Jedi series damn near perfected it in Survivor, with some great moments in Fallen Order, too. Still, the set pieces do serve as climactic punctuation to the end of some of Outlaw's biggest missions, so it's nice to see them, included at all. There's some juicy drama to be found here, too. Kay has mommy issues. There are some emotional beats that land with that storyline. Others are kind of ruined by the ham-fisted hammering of the game's themes, which Carrie Fisher said best in a now memeified moment when she summed up themes of Star Wars as so. This movie's about family, Star Wars is. That's why it has the appeal. That's it. It's about family, everybody. Vin Diesel will be proud. Once again, Humberly Gonzalez is to thank for making it work. All of her dialogue lands with sincerity and believability. I buy her as Kay. The other standout character is a battle droid that accompanies you from around the end of the game's first act onward, named ND5. ND5 is the stoic straight man to Kay's loosey-goosey, more freewheeling nature. He's the muscle of the group, and he's got a pretty interesting history that ties in with the Clone Wars, so there's some lore there. But most of all, his performance comes across with more humanity than I think I've seen any droid get in a piece of Star Wars media. ND5 might be my favorite Star Wars droid. It's a shame he just doesn't really have much to do, aside from occasionally swoop in and save the day. Still, his plotline gets the best arc and the most satisfying payoff. And while I wasn't playing the game because I just gotta know what ND5 does next, he ended up being the character I was the most invested in. Other crew members don't get nearly as much time in the spotlight, basically relegated to the mission where you meet them and recruit them, and whatever their moment is in the big finale. All of them are disappointingly forgettable and weren't given the time from the writers to allow you to get invested in them. I guess it'd be more disappointing if they were actually, subversive takes on, the heist crew character archetypes, but without that hook to latch onto in the first place, it's kind of hard to feel let down by the speed at which they were pushed into the background. So yeah, it's a serviceable story. It doesn't do anything new, but it's not told in a way that slogs. Maybe the biggest crime of the game is locking Sliro, that hammy main villain, to just a couple few and far between cutscenes. This guy's great. There's so much scenery chewing, and he's just underutilized. It's hard to even hate the guy, let alone know why we're really supposed to be scared of him. You know, he's barely in the game. Not to mention, I can kill literally anyone he sends after me with just a soft little bonk to the head. Let this man ham it up, damn it. But now, I have exhausted pretty much all of the good things that I have to say about Star Wars Outlaws. And this is just important to note before getting into the next section of the game, or of the review. I'm not here to, shit all over this game just for the sake of shitting all over this game. Not here to piss off people that love Star Wars just because, I hate Star Wars or something. I like Star Wars. And if you think this is a game that you would enjoy based on everything you've read so far, or heck, maybe you've already played it and you loved it, and you're listening to me and you're like, man, this guy just doesn't get it, I just hope you understand that I'm not attacking you for liking it. I actually like that you like it. I respect that you like it. I understand what you find appealing about it. But I also hope we can collectively acknowledge its flaws and hope that Ubisoft and Massive hear our feedback and deliver a game that is better in every single way next time. Because where this game totally falls apart is in its moment-to-moment gameplay, and that really is just such a damn shame. So, where to start? Okay, let's focus on combat first, since that's probably what you're going to be participating in for the majority of the playtime. It comes in two forms: stealthy, sneaky bonking, and loud, hectic, poorly designed gunfights. The absolute high point of my entire playthrough came from the first time a guard discovered a body. Because there's no mechanic to hide bodies, so they just lay where they fell. It's bound to happen eventually. After quietly sneaking up behind an unsuspecting guard, lightly bonking him on the back of the head, and sneaking back into hiding, another guard rounded the corner. The suspicious marker flashed above his head, and as he approached the guard lying on the ground, he muttered, "My God, he's dead." And I bellowed with laughter. So stealth works like this. You crouch, walk through tall grass, bonk a guy on the head, which murders him, and then it's off to the next box to hide behind, the next vent to crawl through, the next cloud of steam to stoop in. All while guards obliviously mull around, or more commonly, simply stare at walls. That's pretty much it. Well, you do have Nyx, who I mentioned earlier, and serves kind of as like a distraction on command, forcing guards to look the other direction if needed. It's rarely needed. And eventually you can use them to detonate explosive barrels or rig alarms to explode when a guard tries to trigger it. It's a novel idea. It works fine. But Nyx can be mostly ignored, except for when the game kind of forces you to use him to get around some arbitrary puzzles. And the puzzles never evolve beyond send Nyx to hit a button or open a vent so you can shoot a thing. He feels a little like an afterthought, like someone at Disney was like, yeah, but where's the merchandisable character? Give her a cute lizard. What do you mean, what purpose does it serve? Who cares? Have it hit buttons and do little dances. I don't know, just put it in there. We got plushies to sell. So, aside from now I have a taser and can stealth kill robots. Now I have stealth bombs. It's uninspired, predictable, boring stuff that never evolves. The moment-to-moment rhythm of stealth, it never truly changes from hour 1 to hour 40. Oh, did I mention you can use binoculars to mark enemies and keep track of their movements? Did I mention this game is made by Ubisoft? Well, maybe the gun combat fares better. This is a game from the guys that made The Division, after all. Surely it plays somewhat similar to that? Yeah, this is some baffling stuff, alright? So let's start with your arsenal. You get a blaster. That's it. That's your gun. It has a few different modes to swap between, like long range, rapid fire. There's like a shock blast that you can use on robots. There's an explosive charge shot. So there's like a very slight amount of variety involved, and like the tiniest bit of swapping modes on the fly that changes things up a little bit. But that's really it. Shoot people with your sci-fi pistol for the whole game. I guess there's several enemy weapons you can loot from their dead, rotting carcasses. But they last like a few shots before their clips run out, and then, you have to abandon them completely. Not to mention, it's almost like Kay doesn't want to use these weapons, let alone just hold them. She drops them so often. Melee someone? Drop the weapon you were holding. Grab a ledge? Drop the weapon. Ladder? Drop the weapon. Crouch into a vent? A ground level vent? Drop the weapon. I guess all the guns sound pleasantly, nostalgically Star Warsy, but nearly all of them lack weight or punch, except for maybe like the heaviest of them, like the minigun or the grenade launcher. I just never felt compelled to go out of my way to use them, and I usually resorted to stealth tactics over run and gun. Not a huge fan of shooting wave after wave of identical, mostly clueless guards and scoundrels with a weightless gun. Don't like systematically and slowly bonking every single enemy into a sweet, silent oblivion. Don't worry, every single combat arena is absolutely filled to the brim with bright red explosive barrels for you to shoot. They're handy. I'll admit to resorting to this tactic for a majority of the game's forced combat encounters. And yeah, it carried me through them effortlessly. Thank you, Exploding Barrel Delivery Man. What would we do without you? I guess I'd be forced to rely more on my Red Dead slow motion shoot 'em all super ability, which, as is, I only rarely used. I think maybe like a total of like 5 or 6 times throughout the entire game, and that's counting the few times where the game literally forced me to use it for story purposes. It's not that it's not cool and or not visually satisfying, or even that I thought it was like a cheap get out of jail free card. I just kind of forgot it was there and never really needed it. A cover mechanic certainly would have gone a long way towards making these combat sections less frustrating. As it stands, you can only do the duck half of duck and cover, and the various boxes and crates you cower behind seem to only provide a 50% chance of doing their job. No matter how many times I thought I'd find a safe spot to heal, a stray laser would always hit me after a few seconds, almost like it was scripted. Several of the most frustrating moments in my experience were due to the lack of a cover mechanic from a studio whose previous 2 games pretty much revolved entirely around it, which makes it doubly frustrating. The Division 1 and 2 are cover shooter games. And not to mention, the heal mechanic in Star Wars Outlaws is painfully slow for a majority of the game. Like, eventually you can upgrade it, but still, like, what if you get hit while you're healing, it interrupts the entire process, sometimes only providing a literal second of reprieve before it's back in the danger zone, or you're just simply dead. Towards the end, I got a trinket that healed me whenever I performed a melee kill, but the melee is janky as hell and totally unreliable. Avoid if possible. Or don't. Most enemies will die in 3 punches after all. That is, if they take melee damage at all. Some enemies just don't. It feels unreliable and inconsistent, and if I'm gonna resort to the deadliest weapons in Kay's arsenal, her fists, I might as well go for the silent one-shot kills. There's a few boss battles sprinkled throughout the experience. None of them are mechanically engaging. One of them has some weight behind it that works as probably the game's strongest emotional beat. It worked better as a story moment. than a boss battle, to be frank, but at least it worked. The other two boss fights are just things that you've played a million other times in a million other games before this. Lower the shield, shoot the weak point, get the monster to charge into the wall. You get it. You've done this before. They're all serviceable, and they do break up the monotonous shooting sections that otherwise punctuate the end of a mission. I guess I'd rather them exist in the game than not. It could be worse, I guess. Let's briefly summarize some of the other diversions the game has up on offer to paint a picture of how its open world works. Firstly, and probably most importantly, is your speeder bike. It's how you maneuver through the wide, open, mostly empty terrains. It's fast, snappy, and honestly, it's a little scary. Hitting right on the D-pad summons it to you, and I don't know, it just always shows up right behind you. And a little too fast with some strangely jerky movements. It's almost like it's possessed, planning something. There are a few times it nearly ran me over when summoning it. Honestly, if it's a bug, don't fix it, devs. I kind of like my creepy, speedy. It feels like it has personality, even if it's unintentional and slightly hostile. The fact that you can't freely shoot while driving, though, unless your little super bar is filled up, seems like a huge missed opportunity. But whatever, zipping your creepy speedy around these vast, open, empty areas feels nice and quick and never takes too long to get from point A to point B. It's fine enough. The environments are mostly easy to navigate thanks to how open and empty they are. So that's kinda nice. Except for, the occasional rock, which will stop the speeder dead in its tracks and send K flying. But aside from that, Also, did I mention how absolutely open and empty this game feels? Sure, okay, there's NPCs driving around, but you can't steal their vehicles or interact with them in any way except maybe, let them run you over. There's security outposts that pop up occasionally, allowing you to sneak around some more and bonk more and, I don't know, maybe get 100 creds for your trouble, or maybe some pants or something. I didn't even really interact with the equipment system much in this game. If I found pants and they increased my health, I put them on. That's about as deep as it seems to go, with a few, sets that provide a bonus when you have all the pieces equipped at once. Sometimes you might find a cave or a landmark that involves some slight platforming and puzzle solving, but, the puzzles basically just involve swapping between firing modes on your blaster and hitting switches to open up paths, or alternatively, using nicks to hit switches and open up paths. I also absolutely hate the platforming in this game. If you even want to call it that. K feels weighty and stiff, and the climbing sections are dreadfully boring. Why are there so many linear climbing sections? Are they cleverly disguised loading screens? Are climbing sections the new crack-in-the-wall load screen trend? By the way, this game also has plenty of cracks in walls to squeeze through, too. I've been so sick of these climbing sections in games since probably around the time Horizon Zero Dawn released. Why, in a day and age where not just Breath of the Wild exists, but also Tears of the Kingdom, do we still have these games with slow, boring, linear climbing sections? There was a moment late in the game where I had to get to a platform that was just out of jumping distance. I had to climb up a grate, shimmy over 2 sets of small ledges, and around a corner, just to finally be able to drop down onto that platform. It took about 45 seconds to complete something that would have taken less than 2 seconds if Kay could just jump 2 inches further. Still, I guess these little climbing puzzle exploration sections are another welcome diversion to combat, They're pretty much the only diversion, at least out in the open world. there's mini games too, mostly found within the city and settlement areas. Sabacc is the obligatory card game within the open world game. It's kind of like a strange offspring of Uno and Blackjack. It's fine. I really only have enough bandwidth in my brain for one card game within an open world game per year, and that slot is snugly and comfortably filled up with my experience with Queen's Blood, back in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. So sorry, Sabacc. I think I mentioned betting on horse races earlier, but yeah, you could do that too. That's neat, I guess. There's, the find the spot in the world that matches this picture side missions. They're self-explanatory, familiar, used in, again, a million other open world games. And perhaps the most interesting side mechanic, which I really thought would be implemented into the game in a more drastic, consequential fashion, is disappointingly sidelined and mostly meaningless. Star Wars Outlaws has 4 factions, and you have a separate reputation with all of them. Running a mission for one faction usually means crossing another, landing you in the good graces of the first, while your reputation with the latter drops. Missions also usually offer, an alternate ending, with, a binary choice, where you can double-cross whoever hired you, landing positive reputation with the faction whose entire camp you most likely just murdered to death. The whole thing is just implemented sloppily. Having a bad rep with one faction doesn't really lock you out of anything important. You can always regain rep you lost from any faction thanks to respawning procedurally generated faction missions. And having max reputation with a faction basically just gives you some nice gear and access to some areas in the faction's compound, without everyone immediately opening fire on you. It's so disappointing because a system like this has so much potential. Just look at Fallout New Vegas, which employs almost the same exact system to fascinating degrees, leading to one of the most memorable gaming experiences of all time. But here, in Star Wars Outlaws, it's just set dressing, the illusion of choice. As far as I can tell, none of the binary decisions you make throughout the game lead to the story changing in any way. This truly is an Ubisoft game. Okay, one more thing to touch on, in the gameplay section of our review, and then we will jump into our conclusion. Don't worry, I won't hold you here for too much longer. This was so much of an afterthought I nearly forgot to write about it. The game has space combat. It's pretty straightforward, and surprisingly, it feels pretty good. It's better than Starfield's space combat, I'll definitely give it that. The space sections offer, little more than small, explorable side areas to fly around in and basically just connect the larger open world segments. There's a few space stations to explore and ships to explore, and there's a couple, pretty big space battles you could get into, but I wasn't compelled in any way to, hit every single landmark this game had to offer, whether it was in space or on the ground. 40 hours was plenty of time to see most of the side diversions, and rarely did I feel that they were actually worth the time. Save for a few standout missions, side missions, that show up rather subtly and turn out to be some of the most interesting missions in the game. For example, one had me exploring the innards of a dead Sarlacc pit, a totally unique and weird and gross mission, something that I may have totally missed had I not been systematically, robotically going down that Ubisoft checklist. Genuinely surprised that mission wasn't a part of the main story, and I'd be lying if I said I wasn't curious enough to poke around, post-game and see if there's any other side missions I missed. But that's about all I have to say. I think we should wrap this up. Let's get into our conclusion. So, does Star Wars Outlaws elevate the Ubisoft formula for a new age of games? Absolutely not. In fact, I'd say it does the opposite. This is a regression into meme territory for Ubisoft. This is the safest possible game they could have made with the Star Wars IP. Everything I found promising in Avatar Frontiers of Pandora is mostly absent here, except for exploration mode, a setting in the options menu that turns off the guiding yellow paint that plagues climbable edges in nearly every modern video game. I appreciate its inclusion in Outlaws. Everything that I found worrisome in Avatar Frontiers of Pandora, such as repetitive combat, annoyingly dense waves of enemies, a lack of truly interesting side content, an emphasis on hacking minigames, which, by the way, I didn't even mention the hacking or lockpicking minigames. I turned them both off in Star Wars Outlaws. Yes, you can turn them off, and I think it makes the game a way more enjoyable experience. There's just so many doors to lockpick and computers to hack that I think you could probably fill, like 5 to 10 hours of content with those mini games alone. So, yeah, I turned them off. I didn't want anything to do with it, and honestly, I suggest you turn those mini games off too. They're just not fun, and there's too many of them. Avatar had, a lot of forgettable characters and a bunch of other issues, and all those issues are back in full force and more obnoxious than ever in Star Wars Outlaws. Actually, I like that. Obnoxiously bland. That's a good oxymoron. Star Wars Outlaws is obnoxiously bland. And Ubisoft can do better. They've proved they could do better last December. Outlaws and Frontiers of Pandora are two very different games that share nearly the exact same DNA. Yet, only one ended up with the good genes. And it wasn't Outlaws. So in conclusion, Outlaws is beautiful and shallow. Outlaws is obnoxiously bland. Outlaws is a baffling product, and I'd say it leans into being a product more than being a game. It's both a technical marvel and a janky mess. Do I recommend Star Wars Outlaws at launch at the full asking price of $70? Absolutely not. Unless you're like the most die-hard Star Wars fan and you've already exhausted the catalog of far superior games that already exist and do much more interesting things, and you have $70 that you just can't wait to burn, then sure, I suggest Star Wars Outlaws at launch for you. It'd be more reasonable to pick this one up on sale and play it as like an off game, something you bounce to as a palate cleanser or play in short bursts. Maybe you're stuck on like a tough boss in Wukong or Shadow of the Erd Tree, and you just need a break and want to vibe in the Star Wars universe. That's when I think this game would be the most enjoyable. For most people, I wouldn't recommend this game at all. Jedi Survivor literally exists. If you haven't played it, you should. It's solid. Someone out there, several people, are probably really, truly enjoying their time with Outlaws, so don't let me speak for them. If this is your ultimate Star Wars fantasy, I hope you get more out of this game than I did. I'll stick to my telekinetic space wizards with laser swords, though. Thank you very much. By the way, Ubisoft, please don't hate me for this review. I'm very much looking forward to playing Assassin's Creed Shadows next month. Thanks for listening, everybody. This is Plushe. This has been my very first YouTube review for a video game, and I'll see you for the next one. Bye-bye.